My girlfriend said at a street market in Bangkok. I think I want to experience life without expectations. I wished her well, extended my international assignment, and months later, she learned my journey had taken directions neither of us predicted. I think I want to experience life without expectations. She said it so calmly, like she was placing an order at a cafe, not dismantling 3 years of our lives on a humid Tuesday evening in the middle of a Bangkok street market. The smell of lemongrass and charcoal was everywhere. A vendor to my left was fanning skewers over a fire, the smoke curling up into a sky that had turned purple and orange with the setting sun. Children were running between the stalls. Someone's phone was playing a pop song in Thai I didn't recognize. And Clara was standing in front of me, holding a small paper bag of dried mango she had just bought, looking at me with those gray eyes she always claimed were boring, but I had spent 3 years being absolutely helpless against. She wasn't crying. That was the part that got me. Not the words themselves, as brutal as they were. It was the steadiness in her voice, like she had rehearsed this, or worse, like she hadn't needed to rehearse it at all because she had already made peace with saying it long before this moment arrived. I remember picking up a ceramic bowl from the stall next to us, turning it over in my hands, not because I wanted it, but because I needed something to do with my hands while my brain tried to catch up with what my ears had just processed. Okay, I said. Just that. One word. She blinked. I think she expected something different. Maybe a question, maybe a protest, maybe the kind of desperate negotiation that people do when they're terrified of losing something. But I put the bowl down, nodded once, and said, I hope you find whatever that means. And I meant it. I genuinely, completely, wholly meant it. Which was perhaps the strangest part of that whole evening. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Let me give you a little bit of context, because otherwise none of what comes after this will make the kind of sense it needs to make. I was 31 years old. I had been with Clara for 3 years and 4 months, give or take a week. We had met at a conference in Amsterdam, the kind of professional networking event where everyone is slightly overdressed and slightly underfed, circling each other with business cards and rehearsed elevator pitches. She had walked up to me to tell me I had a piece of pretzel stuck to my jacket lapel. That was our introduction. She was a freelance brand strategist. I worked for a logistics and supply chain consultancy headquartered in Geneva, which is a fancy way of saying I spent a lot of time in airports and a lot of evenings on video calls with people in time zones that were never convenient for me. 8 months before that Bangkok evening, my company had offered me an international assignment. 6 months in Southeast Asia, based primarily out of Bangkok, helping a regional client overhaul their distribution infrastructure. It was a significant project, the kind of thing that moves needles on a career. Clara had been between major contracts at the time, and when I told her about it, she had said, almost immediately, that she wanted to come. I can work from anywhere, she said, and I've never spent real time in Asia. So she came. We found a serviced apartment in Sadhorn, a neighborhood that felt like a city within a city, all glass towers and neighborhood noodle shops and weekend farmers markets that somehow made us both feel like we were living properly instead of just passing through. For the first 3 months, it was genuinely wonderful. We explored on weekends. We found coffee shops that became ours. We argued about whose turn it was to figure out the BTS Skytrain routes, and she was always right, and I never fully admitted that. But somewhere around month 4, something started to shift. I could feel it, the way you feel a change in pressure before rain. Nothing specific. No single fight. No betrayal. No revelation. Just a kind of slow, quiet withdrawal. She started spending more time in the apartment alone while I was at the office. She started having long phone calls with people back home that she never fully told me about. She started looking at the city like it was something she was visiting rather than somewhere we were living together. And I noticed, because I always noticed with Clara. I just never knew what to do with what I noticed. That's probably the most honest thing I can say about myself in this story. I saw things clearly, and I acted on them slowly, or not at all. 3 weeks before the Bangkok market evening, she had told me she was feeling restless. Restless how? I asked. Just restless, she said. Like I'm waiting for something and I can't figure out what. I suggested we take a weekend trip. We went to Chiang Mai, did the temples and the night bazaar and a cooking class she had booked that I secretly loved even though I pretended it was a lot of effort. For 2 days, it felt like it used to. She laughed a lot. She held my hand while we walked through Doi Suthep. She took a photo of me looking out over the city from the temple steps and texted it to me later that night saying, You look like someone who actually belonged somewhere for a minute." I kept that message for a long time after. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because it was one of the last times she said something to me that felt completely true and completely kind at the same time. When we got back to Bangkok, the restlessness returned, faster than before and heavier. And then we were at the Chatuchak weekend market 3 weeks later. Not the famous JJ market, but a smaller one nearby that she had discovered on her own. The kind of place that felt genuinely local rather than curated for tourists. And she was eating mango from a paper bag, and she said the thing she said. "I think I want to experience life without expectations." I asked her, after a moment, what she meant by that exactly. Not defensively, actually curious. She looked down at the bag in her hands and said, "I think I've been living inside other people's timelines for so long that I've forgotten what my own looks like." "Whose timelines?" I asked. She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, "I don't think Bangkok is the problem." "What is the problem?" I asked. "I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not someone's girlfriend." There it was. Not a fight. Not an accusation. Just a sentence that functioned like a door closing. I stood there in the noise and the heat and the smoke, and I thought about everything I could say. I could have pointed out that she had chosen to come here. I could have reminded her that I had been nothing but present, nothing but supportive, that I had rearranged my schedule more times than I could count to make sure she didn't feel abandoned in a city she hadn't grown up in. I could have told her that I was afraid. Because I was. Very quietly and very completely, I was terrified. But I looked at her face, and I saw that she had already decided. There was a gentleness in her expression that I recognized as the kind people put on when they've already done the hard emotional work internally, and they're delivering the verdict to you afterward. She wasn't asking. She was informing. And maybe that's what killed the impulse to fight. You can argue with someone who's questioning. You can't argue with someone who's already answered. "Okay," I said, for the second time that evening. "I mean that. Okay. I hope you find it." She searched my face for something. I don't know what she was looking for. Whatever it was, I don't think she found it. She flew home 11 days later. Those 11 days were the strangest period of my life up to that point. We were still in the same apartment. We were still eating dinner together most evenings. We were polite and even occasionally warm. We did not talk about what had happened at the market. We talked about everything else. A documentary she had watched, a restaurant I'd recommended that she wanted to try before she left, the weird fact that the apartment building had a rooftop pool that neither of us had used a single time in 4 months. We went up there on her second to last night. Sat in those plastic recliner chairs they always have at rooftop pools in Asia. The ones that are never quite comfortable, but that you accept anyway because the view makes up for it. The Bangkok skyline stretched out in every direction, all these towers of light, throwing their reflections into a sky that was never fully dark. She said, "You're not angry." "No," I said. "Why not?" I thought about it for a moment. "Because I think you're right that something was wrong," I said. "I just don't think it was us exactly. I think it was something inside you that was happening before us, and that had been running alongside us the whole time." She was quiet for a long while after that. "I'm sorry," she said eventually. "Don't be," I said. "Just be honest with yourself about what you're actually looking for. Don't tell yourself stories that make this easier to walk away from." She looked at me like I'd said something she hadn't expected. "What does that mean?" "It means I hope you figure out what you actually need," I said. "Not just what you need to tell yourself to feel okay about going." Another long silence. The pool lights made the water glow this strange electric blue between us. "I always thought you'd be the one who couldn't handle something like this," she said softly. "You thought I'd beg?" "I thought you'd argue," she said. "Or shut down. Or make me feel guilty. Would that have changed anything?" She didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Her flight left early on a Thursday morning. I took her to the airport. We hugged for a long time at the departure's entrance. She smelled like the shampoo she'd been using since the second month, some green-bottled Thai brand she'd found at a pharmacy near our building and had become inexplicably loyal to. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," I said. I watched her walk through the glass doors. She didn't look back. I stood there for a moment, and then I went to the parking lot, sat in the back of the grab car I had waiting, and I looked out the window as Bangkok slid past in the early morning light. And I made a decision. I called my project director, a no-nonsense Belgian man named Hendricks, who had been with the company for 20 years and communicated primarily through raised eyebrows and precise sentences. "Hendricks," I said when he picked up, "I want to extend." A pause. "How long?" "Another 6 months. Minimum." Another pause. "Personal or professional motivation?" "Both," I said honestly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll make some calls." By the time I got back to the apartment, it was done. The next 3 months changed me in ways I am still, even now, trying to fully understand and articulate. Some of it was the work. Without Clara in the apartment to organize evenings around, I threw myself into the project with a completeness I hadn't allowed myself before. The client, a regional freight company with distribution channels spread across 6 countries, was a complicated, messy, fascinating puzzle. I started working longer hours. I started visiting facilities in Malaysia, in Vietnam, in the Philippines. I started understanding the region not as a destination I was passing through, but as a place with its own logic and texture and rhythm. My Thai improved from functional to conversational. My Vietnamese remained embarrassing, but I kept trying, and the people I met seemed to appreciate the trying more than they cared about the results. I made friends. Real ones. Not the polite professional acquaintances that accumulate on international assignments when you're living inside a relationship and your social universe is mostly just the two of you. There was Prem, a Thai supply chain analyst who worked at the client company and who had a gift for explaining complex local logistics dynamics in ways that made immediate intuitive sense, and who also knew every good eating street in Bangkok with the precision of a cartographer. There was an Australian woman named Cassandra who ran a regional operations consultancy and who I had met at an industry dinner and who became one of the most intellectually honest people I have encountered in my professional life. There was Felix, a Dutch architect who had pivoted to sustainable design and was working on a project in Bangkok's Chinatown, who lived 2 floors below me in the building and who made French press coffee every morning at exactly 6:45, like it was a sacred ritual. These people became my world. And in becoming my world, they also became mirrors. Prem asked me once, about 2 months after Clara had left, whether I was lonely. We were eating at a noodle place near his office, the kind of low-lit shop house where the plastic stools are wobbling and the broth has been simmering since before you were born. Sometimes, I said. In what way? I thought about it. Not in the way I expected, I said. I thought I'd miss having someone to come home to. The ritual of it. Cooking together, talking about the day. And you don't. I do miss that, I said. But what I actually feel more is something like space. A lot of space inside my own head that I hadn't noticed had been occupied. Prem nodded slowly, slurping broth with the practiced calm of someone who takes food seriously. And is the space good or bad? He asked. I'm not sure yet, I said. That's honest, he said. It's all I've got right now, I told him. He refilled my glass from the water jug and said, sometimes people leave and they believe they are taking something from you, but they are actually just clearing room. I thought about that for a long time after. Felix had a theory about cities. He said every major city had a personality, the way people did, and that if you paid attention long enough, you could figure out what a city was trying to teach you. Bangkok is teaching you to not take things so seriously, he said one Saturday morning on his balcony, handing me a cup of the French press coffee that was, genuinely, very good, but also to not take things so lightly. It's a paradox. The city holds 2 contradictory truths at once, and it refuses to explain itself. I laughed. That's either very profound or complete nonsense, I said. Most true things are, he said, completely undefended. Felix was one of those people who had arranged his life in a way that looked unconventional from the outside, but felt deeply intentional once you understood his logic. He had walked away from a partnership at an architecture firm in Rotterdam. He had packed 2 bags and a drawing portfolio. He had moved to Asia with a project he believed in and a willingness to stay uncomfortable for however long the discomfort was useful. He was not running away from anything. He was running towards something, and he knew exactly what it was. That distinction had started to feel important to me. Clara texted me 6 weeks after she left. It was a message that said, "Hope Bangkok is still being kind to you. Are you okay?" I sat with that message for about 20 minutes before I replied. Then I wrote, "Yeah, more than okay, actually. Hope you're finding what you were looking for." She replied an hour later, "Trying to. It's slower than I thought it would be." I didn't respond to that one, not because I was being cold, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say, and I had learned by then that saying nothing was more honest than filling silence with noise. She didn't follow up. A few weeks passed. Then another message. "I heard you extended the assignment." "I did," I wrote back. "How long?" "Not sure yet. As long as it takes." "Takes for what?" I thought about that. Then I wrote, "I'll let you know when I figure it out." That one she left on read. I want to tell you about the evening in Chiang Rai because it was the first moment I understood that something inside me had genuinely shifted. The project had taken me up north for a site visit to a cold chain distribution facility that the client was building near the Mekong River. After the visits were done, I had 2 free days. Cassandra happened to be in the area for a separate project. We rented bicycles and spent an afternoon riding through villages that felt entirely removed from the Bangkok I had been living in. Cassandra was 44, 12 years older than me, divorced, with a daughter she spoke about with the kind of easy, uncomplicated love that some parents make seem effortless. She was one of those people who asked questions the way a surgeon uses instruments, precisely, with clear intent, never more than necessary. We stopped at a small temple on the edge of a rice field. A woman was making offerings at the entrance. The afternoon light was that specific gold that only happens near sunset in rural Southeast Asia, where everything looks like a painting someone has not quite finished. Cassandra leaned her bicycle against a tree and said, "Do you want to talk about her?" I looked at her. "Prem told you." "Nobody told me anything specific," she said. "But you mentioned once that you'd extended the assignment for personal reasons, and you have the look of someone who is actively not thinking about something." I laughed. "That obvious?" "Only to someone paying attention," she said. "Which I happen to be." We sat on a low stone wall near the temple entrance, and I told her the story. All of it. The market, the mango, the 11 days, the airport, the decision to stay. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than people realize. When I finished, she said, "What do you miss most about her?" Not, "Are you over her?" Or "Do you think she'll come back?" Just, "What do you miss?" I thought about it for a real amount of time. "I miss having someone who knew my expressions," I said finally. Someone who didn't need me to explain what I was feeling because they had spent enough time with me to read it without words. Cassandra nodded. "That's the deepest kind of loneliness," she said. "Not missing a person, missing being known." Something happened around month 5 of my extended assignment that I still find difficult to describe without it sounding like the kind of thing people say in self-help books, which is not the register I want this story to occupy. But I'll try. I had started keeping a journal, not because anyone recommended it to me, just because the project required a lot of report writing and I had become accustomed to putting words to things at the end of the day, and at some point the professional reports bled into something more personal. I was reading back through entries from the first 2 months after Clara left, and I noticed something. The entries from that period were full of questions. Questions about what she was doing, questions about whether she had found what she was looking for, questions about whether I had done something wrong, questions about whether the relationship had been as solid as I believed it was. But the entries from the past month or so contained almost none of that. They were about what I had seen that day, what Prem had said over noodles that made me think differently about a problem, a conversation with Hendrix about the next phase of the project, a film Felix had recommended that I had watched alone on the balcony of my apartment with the Bangkok skyline behind the screen, a phone call with my brother back in London that had made me laugh for the first time in a while in the specific way only he could make me laugh. The questions about Clara had not been replaced by answers. They had just been replaced by other things. By my own life, filling back in. I want to be precise about something, because I think precision matters here. I did not fall out of love with Clara in any dramatic or satisfying way. It was not a clean break or a revelation or a moment where I looked at a photograph of her and felt nothing. What happened was subtler and, I think, truer than that. I started to understand that the grief I had been carrying was not purely about Clara herself. It was about the version of myself that existed within that relationship. A version that was loving and present and deeply committed, yes, but also one that had quietly arranged a very significant portion of his interior life around another person's needs and rhythms and emotional weather. I had mistaken devotion for identity, and when she left, the identity went with her. But here's the thing nobody tells you about that kind of loss. When the version of yourself built around someone else dissolves, what you find underneath is not emptiness. It's material. It's the raw stuff of who you actually are, unmediated. And working with that material, getting to know it, learning to trust it without filtering it through someone else's perception of you. That is the hardest and most necessary work I have ever done. Bangkok taught me that. Or maybe I just finally had enough space and silence to teach it to myself. About a month before my extended assignment was due to finish, Hendrix flew out to Bangkok for a review meeting. Afterward, over dinner at a riverside restaurant in AITA, he set down his fork and looked at me with the particular attention he reserved for things he considered important. "You're different," he said. "Different how?" I asked. The work has always been excellent, he said. You know that. That's why you're here. But there's a quality to how you operate now that wasn't there before. What quality? He thought about it for a moment, which was unusual for Hendricks, who generally spoke with the decisiveness of someone who had pre-sorted his words into alphabetical order. Groundedness, he said eventually. You're not trying to prove anything. The last time you were at this level of technical complexity, you were excellent but tight, like someone holding their breath. I said nothing. Now you breathe, he said simply. He picked up his fork again. He didn't make a big thing of it. That was Hendricks. He said the important thing, and then he moved on. I had been debating whether to return to Geneva after the assignment or request a permanent regional position. Hendricks had raised the possibility over dinner. There was a regional director role opening up. It would mean staying in Asia, likely Bangkok-based, for at least 2 to 3 years. It was a significant jump. More responsibility, more complexity, more of exactly the kind of work I had come to love. I told him I needed a week to think about it. He said fine. I went home that night and sat on the balcony of the apartment that had been mine for almost a year now, and I looked at the city and I thought about Geneva, which was clean and precise and familiar and full of things I had accumulated before Bangkok. Furniture, habits, a running route along the lake that I had not thought about in months. I thought about what it would mean to go back, and I realized, with a kind of quiet surprise, that going back felt like a choice made out of inertia rather than intention. And I had sworn off inertia. So I called Hendricks the next morning and said yes to the regional role. He paused for exactly 2 seconds and then said, "Good. There's a lot of work to do." For days after I told Hendricks yes, Clara called. Not a text, a call. Her voice had a specific quality in it I recognized as the precursor to something honest, slightly unsteady, like she was walking on ground she wasn't sure about. "Can we talk?" she said. "We're talking," I said. "I mean really talk." I was in the middle of making dinner. A Thai curry recipe Prem had walked me through on the phone the previous week, which I was still perfecting. I turned the heat down on the pot and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Okay," I said. "Go ahead." A pause. "I think I made a mistake," she said. I felt the words, the way you feel something cold drop into your chest. Not painfully, just noticeably. "What kind of mistake?" I asked. "I think I was scared," she said. And I told myself I was being brave, because it's easier to believe that. But I think I was just scared. Scared of what? Of how serious things were getting, she said. Of what it would mean if I actually committed. Of what I was giving up if I chose one path instead of all the other hypothetical paths. I listened. I didn't interrupt. "I thought leaving would give me clarity," she said. And in some ways it did. But not the clarity I expected. "What clarity did you get?" I asked. Another pause. Longer. "That I'd been projecting things onto you that weren't yours," she said. "Expectations I had about how my life was supposed to look that I was unconsciously holding you responsible for not fulfilling." I hadn't expected her to be that honest. It knocked something loose in my chest that I hadn't realized was still locked. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I know it's late," she said. "I know you've moved on. People told me you're doing well, that you seem different, happy, settled. I just needed to say this to you. Because you deserve to hear it." "People told you?" I said. "I still talk to Cassandra sometimes," she said. I hadn't known that. "Clara," I said, and it was the first time I'd said her name in months. "Yeah. What are you asking me?" A long silence. "I don't know if I'm asking anything," she said finally. "I think I just wanted to be honest with you in a way I wasn't before I left." "Okay," I said. "That's it," she said. "Okay. I believe you," I said. "I think you're telling the truth. I think it took courage to call. And I'm glad you did." "But," she said. I looked out the window at the Bangkok skyline. At this city I had been afraid of, and then bewildered by, and then fallen genuinely, quietly in love with. At the life I had built here, slowly and deliberately, out of raw material I hadn't known I possessed. "But I'm not in the same place I was when you left," I said. "Not because I'm angry. I'm not angry. But I've been doing a lot of work on myself, and the person you knew in the apartment in Sathorn is not exactly who I am now." "What do you mean?" "I mean I've made some major decisions," I said. "About my career, about where I want to live, about what I want my life to look like. And those decisions don't include going back to what we were." She was quiet for a very long time. "Do they include someone else?" she asked. The question was careful, not accusatory, just careful. "No," I said. "They include me mostly." Which was true. There was no one else in the romantic sense. What there was instead was something I was still learning to value more than I used to. The specific, undiluted pleasure of being completely responsible for my own direction. I see, she said. Her voice had a quality I recognized. Not shattered. Something more complicated than that. The sound of someone arriving at a truth they had intellectually prepared for and still not emotionally anticipated. For what it's worth, I said, I think you did the right thing. Not for me, but for yourself. I think you needed to leave, and I think the fact that it didn't give you what you expected is not a failure. I think that's actually what clarity looks like sometimes. That's a generous way to see it, she said. It's the true way, I said. I'm not being generous. I'm just being accurate. Another silence. Take care of yourself, I said. You too, she said. And then we stayed on the line for a few more seconds, not saying anything. And then one of us hung up. I'm not actually sure which one of us it was. I turned the heat back up on the curry and stirred it. It smelled good. I texted Prem. The cardamom amount. Is it always 3 pods, or does it depend on the other spices? He replied 4 minutes later with a voice note that was 90 seconds of very specific and enthusiastic cardamom guidance. I listened to it twice and made a note. I have thought a lot, in the time since that phone call, about what it means to wish someone well and have that wish be completely genuine. Because I did wish her well. I do wish her well. There is not a version of this story where I want Clara to be unhappy. But I also know, and this is the part that took me the longest to understand, that wishing someone well does not require you to hold space for them in your life indefinitely. Love, I have come to believe, is not measured by its duration. It is measured by its honesty. The 3 years I spent with Clara were real. The care was real. The compatibility was real, up to a point. But there is a kind of compatibility that works at a certain altitude of life, at a certain level of intentionality, and then stops working when one or both people start asking bigger questions. We had reached that altitude, and neither of us had the exact tools to handle what we found there. She left and looked for those tools in the direction of openness and freedom. I found mine in the direction of rootedness and depth. Neither of us was wrong. We were just operating from different maps. The regional director role started formally 3 weeks after that call. It meant a new apartment in a different part of Bangkok, Thongler, which Felix called the part of Bangkok that is trying very hard to be everywhere at once, which was accurate and also part of its charm. It meant a team of 12 people across 4 countries. It meant a level of responsibility I had been told to expect, but that still landed heavier than I had anticipated in the first week. On the night before my first official day in the new role, Felix and Prem and Cassandra and I went to a rooftop bar in Ekami that Felix had found through some connection in the architecture community. The city spread out below us in all its impossible, glittering, overwhelming specificity. Prem gave a short toast. He said, "To staying when staying is the right thing." Cassandra said, "And to knowing when it is." Felix raised his glass and said something in Dutch that he then translated as, "To the version of you that exists on the other side of the hard thing." I raised my glass. I did not say anything. I just looked at the city and thought about a street market in the early evening, and the smell of lemongrass, and a woman with gray eyes holding a bag of dried mango, and one sentence that had cracked something open. I thought about the 11 strange, suspended days that followed. I thought about a rooftop pool that neither of us had ever used. I thought about Chiang Rai and the golden afternoon light and a question about what I missed most. I thought about a journal full of questions that had slowly been replaced by a life. And I thought about what it means to extend, not just an assignment, not just a contract, but yourself. To take what you thought was your ceiling and treat it as a floor. To say, in the face of something devastating, okay, and mean it not as surrender, but as permission. Permission for yourself to become something you hadn't imagined you were on your way to becoming. I have one last thing to tell you, and it is small, but it matters to me. About a month into the regional role, I was walking back from a site visit in the Lat Freo area. Prem had driven, and he dropped me 2 streets from my apartment because there was a market on that evening that he knew I liked. I walked through it slowly, the way I had learned to walk through Bangkok markets. Not hurrying, not buying, just moving through the heat and the noise and the abundance of it all. At one stall, a woman was selling dried fruits in small paper bags, including mango. I stopped. I bought a bag. I walked the rest of the way home eating dried mango from a paper bag in the evening air of a city that had, at some point I could not exactly identify, stopped being the place where my relationship ended and started being the place where I lived. The distinction sounds small. It is not small at all. I don't know what Clara is doing now. I know from the occasional mutual connection that she is back in Amsterdam. I know she has taken on some significant projects. I know she seems, by all accounts, to be doing what she said she needed to do, building a life that belongs fully to her. I am glad. I mean that in every direction. I am not glad in the complicated, performative way that people sometimes mean it when they say they're glad an ex is doing well, while privately hoping they're at least a little bit sad. I am genuinely, plainly, uncomplicated glad. Because here is what I know now that I did not know on that Tuesday evening in Bangkok. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to not fight their leaving. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stay. Not to prove something to them. Not to be in the right position when they return. But because the place where you're standing has become, somehow, without your quite noticing, the place where you belong. She said she wanted to experience life without expectations. She was asking for freedom from the future she thought she owed. And without meaning to, she gave me the same gift. She set me free from the version of myself that was waiting. Waiting to be seen, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be enough. I stopped waiting. I started living instead. And Bangkok, this loud and beautiful and impossible city, held me while I figured out what that actually meant. I've been here a year and a half now. I speak Thai with a British accent that Prem finds endlessly entertaining. I make a curry that is, by objective consensus of the people who have tried it, very nearly correct. I have a team I am proud of and work that matters and mornings that feel like mine. I think about the rooftop pool sometimes, the one we never used. I think about how easy it is to be in the middle of something extraordinary and still never quite step into it. I think about how the extension was the best professional decision I ever made. And then I think about how it was also something else entirely. How it was the moment I chose myself. Quietly, without announcement. In the parking lot of an international airport at 6 in the morning. In a car moving through a city that was just beginning to wake up. One phone call. One word. Yes. If this story landed somewhere in you, if it touched something you've been turning over quietly in your own life, drop a comment below. Tell me where you are in your story. I'd actually like to know.